They also say here that the founding clubs will receive an amount of €3.5 billion.
He's getting the information now while he's doing the news. Wait a second. Oh no, that's from my mum. The people's game, the beautiful game. Football has always had a special place in the affections of the world's people. But does this new breakaway European Super League reveal to us that the relentless march of globalisation is reaching its pinnacle and nothing matters but money?
Well, it appears this proposal of a European Super League, which poses an existential threat to football as we know it, is going ahead.
Football, for any of you that care about it, gets deeper into your being than matters, particularly at a time like this when West Ham have a chance of qualifying for the Champions League. And in a way, we all know that corporatism has bled into every facet of the game, into the shirts, into the high wages of people connected with the sport, the players, the agents, whatever. But there is still something mysterious and beautiful. And to hear the passionate way that former players, pundits and even current players are talking about this reveals to me that there are real alliances, real bonds between fans and footballers, and there still remains something important in football that is worth preserving.
So the founding clubs, including those Premier League clubs that we've just spoken about, will receive an amount of €3.5 billion solely to support their infrastructure investment plans. Yeah, this is about money.
What you can see really is the veil is lifting and we're seeing that corporatism is what runs football. What's, I suppose, especially disturbing, and Gary Neville speaks beautifully about this, is football is mined from, mired in, harnesses the affection and love of fans who see football teams as an extension of community. They grew out of community resources, often as a result of industrial football teams for shipyard workers, metal workers, miners. Football represents community in a powerful and primal way. Just the other day, a friend of mine, who I guess is in his 70s, says football's the only environment where he prays sincerely in the moment, where he feels completely connected to outcome. I've had some of the most beautiful experiences of my life as a football fan. Also some of the most enervating, annoying, destructive and hurtful experiences. But the fact is, I suppose, that all of our culture requires that at some level it reaches something primal, innate, potentially essential within us. Whether that's our community values, our greed, our higher aspirations. Now it's clear that what's driving this project is corporate greed. All capitalism is driven by that. Any claims of it being driven by entrepreneurship and ingenuity are starting to look increasingly less valid, because you can be a genius or an entrepreneur within fairer, more localized systems. Greed is what drives perpetual excess, perpetual consumption. For the fans, clearly the thing that's being reached in us is a deep, deep atavistic yearning for community and oneness, which is hard to connect to in an increasingly atomized culture where your role is primarily as a consumer, not as an activated citizen.
I mean, I'm a Manchester United fan and have been for 40 years of my life, but I'm disgusted, absolutely disgusted.
Gary Neville speaks so beautifully on this subject. What I like about this is, he's on Sky Sports, he's a former Man United player, but when he speaks today, he speaks from the perspective of a fan and as a person who loves football. And as he says, he's not averse to money or profit or enterprise, but he sees this as especially galling. Let's investigate why.
I'm disgusted with Manchester United and Liverpool most. I mean, Liverpool, they pretend, you'll never walk alone, the people's club, the fans club. Manchester United, 100 years, born out of workers around here. And they're breaking away into a league without competition that they can't be relegated from.
Perhaps that's what's particularly unique about football, is its ability to harness sentimentality, togetherness. Think of the atmosphere in a country like this one, like British countries, various British countries, or Ireland, or anywhere. The feeling of when there's a World Cup on, a kind of giddy, festive euphoria, a true sense of carnival, i.e. normal rules are suspended. Think of the conversations you have with people you love about football that you can't connect with in any other way except when talking about this transfer or that transfer or this tactic or that tactic or this sacking or that sacking. And I suppose what's galling is the expectation to maintain a kind of the affiliation and loyalty and devotion and dedication, the kind of religious and spiritual impulses that, like it or not, are attached to football, even when it becomes glaringly obvious that they are being exploited, neglected, mobilised in order to create profit.
It's an absolute disgrace, and honestly, we have to wrestle back the power in this country.
When Gary Neville says that about wrestling back power, don't you think that he's talking about something a lot more important than football? Doesn't this just seem to you to be an emblem of globalisation? Don't you feel that if you pursue this line, where does it end up? The localisation of football clubs, the return to democracy for local communities, the challenge of centralised, non-regulated business interests, making governments culpable for the people that they are supposed to govern and control, changing that relationship, renegotiating social contracts. Moments like this are significant. It's significant enough, even if you take the incident in literal isolation. But if you extrapolate from it the emotions and meanings that can be drawn from it, it becomes yet more vital still.
But I've been calling for 12 months as part of another group for an independent regulator to bring checks and balances in place to stop this happening. It's pure greed. They're imposters. They're imposters. They're nothing to do. The owners of this club, the owners of Liverpool, the owners of Chelsea, the owners of Manchester City, they're nothing to do with football in this country. There are 100 and odd years of history in this country from fans that have lived and loved these clubs, and they need protecting.
I've heard it said by acting coaches that what you want when you see an actor in a play on a screen is just one moment of truth is conveyed, some moment of spontaneity rather than the rigid, dead reading of lines. What we get here from Gary Neville is he's been hit in his emotional core by a piece of information, and he's responding in a very, very sort of authentic and beautiful way. He's talking about history, tradition, values, principles. I think Rio Ferdinand spoke very beautifully about it, and what I'm touched by when Gary Neville and Rio Ferdinand, people that the game has made wealthy, is to see them talk in a way where we see where their loyalty lies. Their loyalty ultimately lies with the game.
I benefited from football hugely. I've made money out of football. I invest money into a football club. Now, I'm not against money in football, but the principles and ethos of fair competition and the rights to play the game so that Leicester win the league, they go into the Champions League. Manchester United aren't even in the Champions League. Arsenal aren't even in the Champions League. You watched them earlier on today. We're absolute shambles of a football club at the moment.
Never miss an opportunity to criticise Arsenal.
And they want a God-given right to be in there. They're an absolute joke. And honestly, the time has come now. Independent regulators, stop these clubs having the power base. Enough is enough.
Let's be clear about this.
I think he's been pretty clear about it. He's not been opaque and obscure about it. I don't know. I think it's a good idea. I like Super Leagues.
It's criminal. It's a criminal act against football fans in this country. Seriously, in the midst of a pandemic, an economic crisis, football clubs at National League level going bust nearly, furloughing players, clubs on the edge in League 1 and 2. And these lot are having Zoom calls about breaking away and basically creating more greed.
It's pretty incredible, isn't it? I suppose because this is what he's dedicated his life to, so his own personal truths will be related to this. But any of us, just me, like a regular common or garden football fan, I have connections to the game of football through my love of West Ham that connect me to my father, to men I never met, like my grandfather, my own masculinity, maleness, community, my class politics in general, the erosion of working class communities, the commodification of sport. It operates in the psychic space in a catalytic way. This is an important issue. It's also an exciting issue. Public opinion will sway this. You know, all capitalism, all commerce is dependent on public opinion, and public opinion is a phrase that's become sort of stripped of its value and power. Public opinion means the control of the consciousness of ordinary people. If you can control and manipulate the messaging and opinions and the attention of ordinary people, you can control reality. Well, guess what? We can confront that, we can alter it, we can countenance it, particularly when you see figures with the amount of cultural freight and personal experience and expertise, such as Neville here, talking so overtly and articulately and passionately about the subject. This is an opportunity to galvanise, to mobilise, to unionise, and to demand more. Yeah, I love the idea of a regulatory body, but why stop at that? Why not have meaningful fan ownership of all football clubs? Why not have true democracy? Why not end this ludicrous spectacle of giddying transfers and return to a sport that impacts people on an emotional, cultural level where you feel real connection and real ownership? And why not echo those ideas throughout culture, throughout community, so that you're not so dependent on football as being the only way that you feel connected to your roots, your childhood, the place that you're from?
This is a grab, an absolute grab, at a time when, honestly, the timing is hideous. Where do these people, what world are these people living in? To think that they can bring this forward at this moment in time.
Well, could it have something to do with the fact that they perhaps don't feel any loyalty to this country and these leagues?
It's amazing, but it's that on Sky Sports talking about this. It wasn't that long ago that there were not as heated, but certainly comparable conversations about media ownership, the ability of privatised corporate media to control national debate, and Sky is one of them. The fact is that all of us, me being on the kind of social media platforms that I'm on and having to earn an income from my voice, all of us are to some degree compromised, but we are permitted to have a social conversation about where we see the boundaries, about what we ought to be aspiring to. And I think significantly, what are the root motivators of what we're doing? There's a difference between survival and greed, isn't there? Greed is, by its nature, requiring an excess of what's needed. Now, I think all of us perhaps have become, to a degree, prisoners of comfort compared to people 100 years ago. But what are the motivating energies at the core of our being? How do we want to define ourselves? Who do we want to be? How do we see our world? How do we want to express ourselves through culture? This could be a significant moment of awakening. And what's important about it is it's happening in an area that is populist, that affects a great many people. I've always believed that if you awaken football fans to the possibilities of political change, of localisation, of communal ownership, of authority over the things you love most in your life, your football club, your family, your community, that this is how you could change the world. This is how you could brush aside the illusion of centralised authority, brush aside the illusion that nothing changes and this is just the way things are and capitalism is the least worst of all possible alternatives. No, we can redesign, reimagine new communities, new realms, new worlds. Everything that is in existence passes through the intelligence and consciousness of individuals, meteorology and nature aside. We can imagine the world differently. We can create something a lot more ambitious than a Super League.
Let Fulham stay up, relegate United, Liverpool and Arsenal. Because them three clubs, to be fair, are the history of this country. They should be the ones that should suffer most. Yeah, Chelsea, City, new money in the game, they've sort of come forward. I'm not happy with them either, let's be clear. Tottenham, I'm not really that bothered about.
Another little dig at Tottenham.
You know, Manchester United, Liverpool and Arsenal, they should know better.
It's also become sort of like a school teacher now of the Premier League. Arsenal, Spurs, I expect this of you, Tottenham, but Arsenal, Man United, Liverpool. Sorry, sir.
And Liverpool Football Club. I mean, seriously. You go on the streets of Liverpool. I mean, I have a great relationship with them. I don't like them. They don't like me. But you know one thing I always thought about them? They were honest. They had integrity. They would look after the people. They'd look after their own. That's gone. Forget that.
An extraordinary piece of rhetoric. I mean, I think one of the reasons that this has become so impactful, not just because of the topic, but because of the manner. It's not normal to see someone speak in such an unguarded way on mainstream media. This will define Gary Neville, I think. This is, I would say, obituary material that will be referred to, you know, when Gary Neville, as all human beings must, passes. This is defining because it defines him as a character, it defines where he's coming from. So I'm not necessarily making this all about Gary Neville, but of course I think he's just been a very beautiful vehicle for the truths at the heart of this issue. Me, as you might imagine, as a person outside of the game of football, would push further. This should be used to leverage fan ownership of football clubs, a complete re-examination of the way that we're governed beyond even football, that football is important because it brings to the forefront of our collective imagination ideas of community, unity, togetherness, even conflict, but conflict in a way that is reasonable. It's okay for us to take the piss out of each other for supporting different teams and for the minor failings of football clubs, because we're all ultimately the same. We all love our teams and our clubs. So, you know, this is an important season for us as well. So for me, this issue and this piece of rhetoric could be used to, and that's in fact what I'm trying to do, to outline some very, very significant issues.
The owners were fully expecting a backlash. They knew that their plans were going to be opposed and opposed vociferously, but we're being told, to be honest, they're not that worried about bad PR at the moment. And we're being told also that in general, the owner's view is this, and this is a quote from a board member at one of the 6 clubs. Our primary job is to maximise our revenues and profits. The wider good of the game is a secondary concern.
I would say this is what happens if you allow immersive capitalism to take hold of a culture. This is beyond football. This is more significant than football. This is the war for the heart of a population. We're already lost and bewildered in the midst of this great reset. Where is your personal authority? Where is your personal autonomy? Who is surprised to hear that these clubs don't care about public opinion? Who is surprised to hear that their only objective is profit? That's what our economic systems demand. It's clear that what people are driving towards is an elite that controls all resources and a kind of wasteland occupied by ordinary people. It's a kind of economic arc that's being created. This is a sort of a further move towards elitism that is galling.
I asked this board member if civil war had now broken out in football. He said to me, this is not civil war, it is a nuclear war.
Clearly, this is a war within football. Sport is sanitised war. The kind of feelings that are expressed, the kind of emotions that are metastasised through sport are important, even though football is bounded by white lines and takes place within rules. The emotional territory that it occupies is significant, powerful, primal, and what is being discussed and alluded to here politically is of vital importance too. We're talking about fairness, inequality, rampant capitalism, and what you actually own of your culture. Increasingly it becomes clear that Terence McKenna's famous quote, "Culture is not your friend," is apposite. Culture exists to suppress you, control you, distract you. Occasionally a cultural artifact emerges that mobilises an aspect of you that is real, your emotional connection to community, harmless rivalry, fun, joy, community, togetherness. Football is one such phenomena. It must be protected. I hear some of the ideas that have been talked about here, regulation, but I would settle for nothing less than meaningful fan ownership of football clubs and all that that implies. Reclamation of these public resources and a return to democratic ownership of football teams by the community that hold them in their hearts and that built them with their support, with their fanaticism, with their love. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please press like, subscribe to it, share it around if you're so inclined. If you want to get my mailing list, go to russellbrand.com and sign up to that. Belong to our little Illuminati cabal where we exchange information offline. Thank you very much. Peace. Come on, you irons.